Joining me this morning, as always on Wednesdays, at least we try to make this a regular gig, from Institute for Reforming Government, Jay Curtis. How are you?
Morning, Meg. Good. How are you?
Very good. And let's just make sure everyone knows you're an attorney, general counsel, and director of IRG's CIO. Tell me what CIO is. It Court Watch Initiative? Oh, I bet it is.
Well, yeah, actually, Meg, we have really multiple initiatives. It's just a good way to kind of focus efforts, just like a company, right? There's divisions or units. So at IRG, we have Quentin Clavon, who really is our education guru. He does an excellent job, and that's really his focus. And I kind of focus on three areas: administrative law, which you and I have talked about before, and at some point would love to talk about our recent report on the REINS Act, which is a really hot issue in D.C. But then also, as you alluded to, we have two projects going on right now that I think are really critical. One is the CIO, the Center for Investigative Oversight, and we have, for example, been sending public records requests to the Department of Public Instruction. We think it's important to shed light on kind of what happened at DPI over the last year when it came to these test scores. Quentin has done an excellent job highlighting that. The current superintendent, Jill Underly, is really lowering the standards, and she has just less expectation for Wisconsin kids, and we think that's a problem. And if you look at, again, I'm not the expert in this area, this is Quentin, but he's kind of highlighted some things to us that are just startling, right? And actually our president, CJ Safer, talked about this last week at a business meeting in Milwaukee where, we have, based on some national metrics, 8th graders that are testing below other major cities' 4th graders in reading and math. And I mean, when you actually think about that, that's shocking, right? So you have 8th graders who are, should be getting ready to advance into high school and then, spend the next 4 years thinking about what they want to do with their lives, whether it's the trades or going on to higher ed. And our Milwaukee 8th graders, are basically reading or have a 4th grade math level, right? You just it's not sustainable. You're not going to be able to be successful. And I think CJ did a great job talking about last week, again, at this IBAW breakfast, about how, when you think about it, it's an economic issue. It's frankly a human rights issue. You have a large segment of African-American kids in Milwaukee that are just not set up for success. Really, with the exception of the ones that are able to get into places like St. Marcus. This is why we believe so strongly in school choice. And so anyway, that's really what our Center for Investigative Oversight does. We try to shed light on what's going on in state government. The expression "sunlight is the best disinfectant." That's true, right? Whether it's public records requests or working with the legislature to exercise oversight, that's what we do with our Center for Investigative Oversight. And then kind of the third responsibility that I have, and I'm really thankful that you're having us on for the next few weeks, is to talk about our Court Watch project. To the extent people pay attention to the judicial branch, they typically pay attention to the U.S. Supreme Court. And there's just not as much attention given to our state courts, probably with the exception of the few weeks prior to a Supreme Court election in Wisconsin. Really, that's it. And so, obviously, we're heading into an important election. I know you had Judge Schimmel on earlier. And so, we don't do politics, but we do really a focus on issues, and so we've been highlighting important cases, and how the progressive majority has ruled recently, but then also if they haven't ruled on a case, what they could possibly do going forward. And so we're going to continue to highlight. This week we rolled out, we call them primers. We rolled out a primer relating to what would a progressive majority do to the business climate in Wisconsin. And I know we're going to have time to talk about that in detail. We've talked about Act 10, and I think you've had me on to talk about that. We've talked about how when you really look at Act 10, first of all, there's no legal basis to overturn it. Right, the legislature had a rational basis for doing what they did. But the legal argument aside, if you look at it from a policy standpoint, it would devastate local units of government. And so we've talked about that. We talked about the Second Amendment, sportsmen's rights. Right, we have a constitutional right in Wisconsin to hunt and fish, and we have concealed carry. I honestly think that's all at risk with a progressive majority, a really cemented progressive majority that will be there at least through 2028. So those are the issues we're talking about going forward. We have 4 more weeks left in the election. We're going to continue to highlight issues like just judicial philosophy. I think next week we're rolling out a primer relating to specifically what would overturning Act 10 do to K-12 education. Nobody really focuses specifically on that element, but it would be devastating. If you want to talk about worse teacher-student ratios, right? If you want to talk about constrained budgets, that's what eliminating Act 10 would do. And so we're going to be talking about that next week.
Okay, Jake. So our listeners are aware of this. I'm not sure if you are, but as a way to escape from the racket that we're a part of, politics, I every evening at 6:30 tune into Wheel of Fortune. And unfortunately, I have to suffer through more political commercials because the political season never ends. And there's all kinds of commercials, and I've heard from many listeners that are upset and concerned and, how's the Schimmel campaign going to respond to these commercials, et cetera. And I know I'm sure you've seen them too, the commercials that are, and I don't even want to say mischaracterizing, because I think it goes beyond that. It lies about Brad Schimmel's record on rape kits and lies about Brad Schimmel. And, those, I yell at the TV. Now, there's another level of deception that Susan Crawford and her campaign are participating in, and I know that you at IRG have taken a particular interest in it.
Yes. So I think it was 2 days ago, we provided a pretty extensive quote to the Dairyland Sentinel, which is kind of an up-and-coming online news source. And really the focus of it is, so you mentioned the rape kits. That's one issue, right? Just when you look at, there's been a lot of groups out there that I think done some really good work breaking that down, right? It just doesn't, the numbers don't add up for Crawford's criticism, right? I mean, she claims to be an advocate for victims, and yet, somehow arguing that, then AG Schimmel should have just ignored all the victims' wishes when it came to the rape kits. I mean, it's just an absurd argument. But I guess I will say, right? You can. I think it's an incorrect claim. But one can argue and quibble over. The facts. What I think is even more troubling is her statements relating to then DA. So when Judge Schimmel was a district attorney, right? He started his career as an ADA in Waukesha, then became district attorney, then attorney general, and now judge. So this relates to when he was DA in Waukesha County. There was a case involving a horrible situation. Involving an assault on a child, and I believe there was some sort of donation made to Schimmel's political campaign, and so she's claiming that then DA Schimmel was bought off. I mean, that is a very, very serious accusation, and very troubling. If it were true, now I think we all know it's not. But then when we looked at this, there's a problem for Judge Crawford. If she had information relating to then DA Schimmel being, quote, bought off, she has an ethical obligation to report that. To my knowledge, she has not reported that. And I think we all know she hasn't reported that because she doesn't actually, there is no there, right? There's no actual merit to that argument. So then she has a second problem. If she doesn't have that knowledge, she is knowingly running a false, or at least making false political statements. I guess I'm not sure if she'd actually run an ad on that, but she certainly made. You can look right on her Twitter account. I mean, I'm looking right at the image. It's on her X account, and the statement is Brad Schimmel has been bought off by a child predator lawyer, opioid manufacturers, and now Elon Musk. So, the Elon Musk thing, that's just political, right? She's being paid, she's being, supported by George Soros. So you can kind of eliminate that part of it. But the problematic part is Brad Schimmel has been bought off by a child predator's lawyer. I mean, that would be a serious ethical breach on the part of Schimmel. And again, I think we all know it's not true. But she's plowing ahead and to my knowledge, has not retracted the statement. And the problem is there's two codes that control lawyer conduct. If you're a lawyer, there's the code of ethics. If you are a judge or justice, then obviously there's a code of ethics, but then there's also the code of judicial conduct. And if you read the piece at Dairyland Sentinel, I think the author did a good job of laying out how, right, either way, if she had this knowledge and she failed to report, or if she's knowingly making false political statements, either way, that's a violation of both the code of ethics and the code of judicial conduct. And that's a problem. And I think at some point somebody needs to look closely at filing a complaint with either the Judicial Commission or the Office of Lawyer Regulation.
Well, and I guess all is fair. If Brad Schimmel were to make those types of claims, of course we would expect the same kind of transparency. But I certainly know that the Democrats would expect that. So, I mean, has anyone from the Crawford campaign been asked to respond to this? And at least, I don't know. Well, I'll just say it again. Have they been asked to comment on this?
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. So this story, I think, ran. What's today? Today's Wednesday. I think it either ran Monday night or Tuesday morning. I think it was Monday night. So it's barely been 48 hours. To my knowledge, she has not responded. But we're going to continue to highlight that as long as the statement is still public facing, and the last time I checked, it was still on her Twitter feed or her X feed. It's essentially a false political statement that's being promoted and made public. And I understand, right? We have elections in Wisconsin for our judicial branch. I actually think it's a fair criticism, right? I mean, if she's going to criticize Judge Schimmel for getting outside support from somebody like Elon Musk, it's fair game for Judge Schimmel to criticize her for getting support from George Soros. I think it's fair to then question, what does that mean? Right? I think that's all. We elect our judges, and that's kind of part of the political process. I think you can debate whether or not that's a good thing. It kind of is what it is, right? This statement is problematic. I mean, to accuse a district attorney when Schimmel was a district attorney of being bought off is a serious accusation. Frankly, it's not really noted in the article, but you could take it a step further, that it's potentially criminal behavior. And I hate, I hate where we've gotten in politics. I hate lawfare. But if she's going to stand by this statement, it's potential criminal liability. And this isn't like some kind of right-wing academic exercise. This happened in Milwaukee County just in December of 24, where an individual running for, I think it was a state assembly, and he's one of these individuals, he runs a lot, he's a conservative, he's running in Milwaukee County, I believe in the city of Milwaukee itself. So good for him for running and taking it on. He had a flyer relating to the firing of former police chief Morales. And, there's a question as to whether or not his statement was accurate. I think he had accused his opponent of kind of facilitating the firing. His opponent really had no jurisdiction over the firing. So it was an incorrect statement. He admitted it was a mistake. And I think, the problem was he continued to put out the flyer. And he was actually prosecuted and ultimately pled to, I believe it was a fine, a $250 fine. But this was an actual prosecution, and he was forced to plead out. He was facing a year in prison or a year in jail, and I believe a $500 or $600 fine. So this was a serious prosecution. He ultimately pled out. So this happens. Now that was Milwaukee County, and it was a conservative that the DA went after. Um, there's potential for criminal liability here, and that would be outside our lane. But I think if she's going to maintain that Judge Schimmel was bought off as a district attorney, somebody should look into that.
Well, Jake, I have to say that having sat through some of these Crawford commercials and screamed at them, she at the very least alludes to that in her campaign commercials too. That very thing about bought off.
Right. Yeah. And this is where somebody would really have to look closely and look at the context. But again, the words "bought off" are powerful words. It's one thing to say, Elon Musk has made a donation, and therefore, Judge Schimmel's a right-wing extremist. I mean, I don't agree with it, but it's politics, and unfortunately, that's kind of where our politics have gotten to. But to accuse somebody of being bought off means, she's essentially accusing him of taking a bribe. That's a serious accusation. To my knowledge, Judge Schimmel hasn't made any sort of similar accusation against her. He's talked about some of her sentences as a judge, her involvement as a private sector attorney on some of these cases like Act 10. I think that's all fair game. He's not accusing her of taking a bribe, which is exactly or essentially what she's doing with him.
Well, and I guess forgive me for being cynical, but I'm not convinced in any way that she will be held accountable. I mean, I've often wondered about political commercials and how far a candidate or a candidate's campaign can really go to. I don't even want to say stretch the truth, because there are outright lies. I mean, I guess that's the way I perceive it in these campaign ads that have been directed against Brad Schimmel.
Well, you're touching on an important issue, right? There's obviously First Amendment implications. And so I would agree it should be an extremely high standard, right? If you're going to propose some sort of regulation of speech, we certainly are going to take the position that, but for knowingly false information, right, a candidate should be able to draw contrasts and distinctions with their opponent. Again, I don't agree with their statements relating to kind of the outside funding. I don't think Judge Schimmel is in the pocket of anybody like Elon Musk. But if I'm going to be objective, I think that's probably speech protected by the First Amendment. So we do have to be careful that we're not putting the government in a position where it's overly regulating speech. In fact, again, I would argue it's only in the most extreme circumstances. But I think this might be one of them, where you have a sitting judge accusing another sitting judge in a previous role as a district attorney, right, the chief law enforcement official essentially in a county, of being bought off or taking bribes. And if she has no information to prove that, and she's knowingly running a false political ad or making false political statements, that's what the whole purpose of the Code of Judicial Conduct is, or the Ethics Code. And I think you need to take a step back and ask the question. We as a state made a decision to have these two codes, right? Do they matter? And I can tell you, as a practicing attorney, I've been in conversations where if there's opposing counsel that has potentially done something unethical, we are fully aware of the Code of Ethics, and we take that seriously. And if we were ever in a position where we knowingly had information, we would report that. And look, I love a good lawyer joke as much as anybody, but the reality is I've been blessed to practice with amazing attorneys as colleagues, and even opposing counsel. Most attorneys are ethical. They take the code of ethics seriously, and we essentially have to police ourselves, because we all know bad attorneys, just like every profession, give all of us a bad name. So the attorneys I have worked with, that I've worked against, we take that code seriously. And so, and I think a sitting judge who's running for the Supreme Court should take the Code of Ethics and the Code of Judicial Conduct seriously as well.
Well, I guess I just, again, who's going to hold them accountable? I think about, I was just down in Madison last month for the Wisconsin Broadcasters Association Advocacy Day, and we met with various legislators and talked about the use of AI in political ads. And I guess the question becomes, who's going to police that? And it can't be on the broadcasters to have to sift through this information. And I guess the same, I guess I have the same kind of concern about these political ads and how persuasive they can be when they are overtly lying about a candidate.
Right. Well, I mean, and you're getting into, this is a topic, obviously, that's being discussed kind of across the legal profession, and it certainly is something that, as a profession, we need to kind of think about, and then, policymakers in Madison and D.C., they need to think about that as well, because, right, we're entering just some pretty uncharted territory, because and I'm not any sort of techie, but my understanding is that these AI tools are unbelievably powerful. Obviously, you see on X and Facebook and things like that, some of the videos that can be generated. It's kind of unbelievable. And so I think ultimately, I would agree with you, Meg, that it's probably difficult for the government to be regulating that. And frankly, again, from a First Amendment standpoint, I don't think we want government weighing in at every single kind of turn, regulating speech. And so I think what's really left is the candidates themselves. I think they have a special responsibility to make sure that what the information they're putting out is accurate. And that's their responsibility. I mean, I've been involved in campaigns, Meg, and I always viewed it as, obviously, I want my guy or gal to win, but we also have a special responsibility to be accurate in the information that we get out to the public when we're trying to persuade them to vote for our candidate. And so ultimately, with AI and political ads, I mean, it's still got to come down to the campaign and their ethical responsibility to ensure that the information that's being put out is accurate. And so, again, in a situation like this with Judge Crawford, if she's knowingly putting out false information, and if there's no information to suggest that then DA Schimmel actually was bought off, I think it's a problem. And I think the commission or OLR needs to potentially take a look at this, because clearly it's a powerful ad. It's a powerful political statement. And there should be some sort of review. And look, I know we need to take a break, but I would add, when you consider some of these issues, right? I think we have kind of been playing with fire, frankly, for the last few years. If you look at the 23 election, I think when you had a candidate blatantly talking about their values and voting consistent with their values. I know I was out there, and I think there were a few other people kind of questioning when you look at other provisions within the Code of Judicial Conduct, because remember, the Code of Judicial Conduct applies to candidates as well as sitting judges or justices. I thought, and I believe Dan O'Donnell did some work in the space, right? There's a problem when you have a candidate for a judicial office talking about their values and making it clear that their values are potentially inconsistent with legislative determinations. Right? That's not the role of the judiciary. The question is, right, is a legislative decision, unconstitutional, inconsistent with another statute, or you have to look at the original meaning and the text? Your values have nothing to do with it. But she was Justice Protasiewicz was blatantly campaigning on her values against Dan Kelly in 2023. I thought that was a situation where, you could have at least questioned whether or not that conduct was inconsistent with the Code of Judicial Conduct, which again applies to candidates. I don't believe that was done. It probably should have been done. And I think, again, these codes exist for a reason. And I think it's important that there's a review done when there's statements like this made.
Okay, Jake, we got to take a break, but I know I would love for you to comment on, speaking of attorneys and ethics, I would like for you to comment on the situation here in Wausau with the curious timing of Wisconsin Attorney General Josh Call's fundraising call to someone on the ethics board in Wausau as they are contemplating investigating the Wausau mayor concurrently while the Attorney General is also investigating him. So stay tuned. Jake Curtis and I will return after this break on the Mega Ellefson Show on WSAU.